I want to be very clear that the silence on the bridge was not standard protocol. The deep hum of the fleet's navigation grid dying had completely ceased 40 minutes ago. Every officer on the tactical bridge was immobilized by the sudden and total loss of telemetry. My temple filaments were discharging uncontrolled static micropulses, which I documented as a standard biological stress response to catastrophic system failure, because if this vessel was lost, my provisional trainee certification would be permanently revoked, assuming I survived the engagement to face a tribunal. The only moving figure was the cartography intern. Callum Bride stood at the forward observation port. He was holding a wedge of brass to his right eye. He muttered a string of digits, lowered the metal instrument, and wrote a number on his palm with an ink pen. I have commanded navigation routing through nebulous storms, ion fields, and gravitational anomalies. I was not prepared for a man with a piece of brass. The quartermaster's catalogue entry would later be cited in 3 separate tactical reviews. You may want to hear why. Our automated routing grid boasts a verified accuracy rating of 99.97%. His leather case, which he had carried onto the ship 6 hours earlier, had an unknown accuracy rating, mostly because the quartermaster had catalogued it as an antique optical instrument with no power source, a classification I explicitly approved in writing. I supervised Bride's boarding transfer personally. My provisional status meant I was assigned the mundane tasks. He had arrived for the cartography cultural exchange with exactly 2 changes of clothes, that specific leather case, and a notebook filled with hand-drawn stellar positions. I followed all verification procedures, every single one. The scanners confirmed the instrument was a harmless cultural artifact. I remember having a slight headache from the atmospheric recyclers adjusting to his respiratory needs, which is irrelevant. The point is, I logged his belongings properly, following all institutional guidelines. There was no logical reason to predict that a rigid container of pre-digital maritime history would outlive our million-credit sensor array. The patrol maneuver began as a standard sector sweep. Bride was assigned a courtesy observation desk at the rear of the bridge, which was essentially a surplus console with restricted data access. He was quiet. He sketched star charts in his notebook, constantly looking out the viewport at the passing systems. Lieutenant Gossar, our tactical officer, found this highly amusing. Gossar's slate-grey skin rippled in specific thermal patterns, which is the biological equivalent of a mocking laugh, as he joked that the human was attempting analogication by drawing the void. Bride just smiled. He left the leather case sitting unopened on his desk. I want to note that I observed a localized anomaly during this period. My bioelectric sensory nodes registered a faint electromagnetic drag whenever Bride moved. His nervous system was electrically active at a level that created minor interference with our proximate sensors. I dismissed it as calibration noise. I should not have done that. I was about to file a maintenance request regarding his bioelectric output when the fleet ambush occurred at exactly 1400 hours. A hostile strike group deployed a localized GPS-denied field across our coordinates. It was immediate. Every digital and quantum-assisted system dropped offline simultaneously. Earth's maritime history is entirely pre-digital, which is a fact I only learned later, but it means they utilized a method called celestial navigation, employing a sextant to measure the precise angle between a celestial body and the horizon to determine their exact position. It relies strictly on optics, geometry, and the human eye, requiring absolutely no electricity or satellite uplink to function. It is dead reckoning by starlight. But at that moment, I only knew that our screens were black. Admiral Crethus demanded an immediate solution from the engagement console. Her commands echoed in the sudden dark. The screens displayed a total tactical wipe. They did not. I must state that accurately for the log. The screens displayed absolute blackness, meaning the tactical wipe was an assumption on my part. There was no response from any station. My filaments sparked. I checked the primary relays. Nothing. I checked the secondary relays. Still nothing. The calm I had attempted to project completely collapsed. The fleet was blind, drifting into an orchestrated trap. And then I heard the faint click of brass locking into place. The darkness on the tactical deck was absolute, save for the emergency backup lighting, which cast a sickly green tint across the floor plating. I noticed a deep scuff mark on my left uniform boot. I stared at the scuff mark for longer than was professionally appropriate because acknowledging the dead navigation array meant accepting that my tribunal hearing would be posthumous. Admiral Crethus was demanding coordinates. She demanded them loudly. Lieutenant Gossar's bioelectric nodes went completely dark. This indicates catastrophic physiological shock in our species. Bright opened the leather case. I want to be very clear that I did not authorize him to remove the cultural artifact from its container during a combat engagement. I was attempting to reboot the tertiary sensors. That was completely pointless. I looked up and saw Bride at the forward observation port, holding the brass instrument to his eye, and I realized with a sudden humiliating clarity that he was not panicking because he already knew the answer. The sketches in his notebook were not artistic interpretations of the void. They were mathematical calculations of stellar drift. He had been tracking our position manually for 6 hours, which meant the intern was the only functional navigator on the ship. He stood at the viewport. He was still muttering those digits. 3 degrees Mark 12, Bride said. His voice was entirely level. Adjust yaw to 280. Admiral Kratos ordered me to verify the human's coordinates against our analog backup gyroscope, which is a redundant compliance requirement I had thankfully maintained, despite my trainee status. I ran the physical dials. The analog numbers matched Bride's coordinates. Well, they matched to within 0.003%, which is statistically identical for planetary intercept. My temple filament sparked violently, emitting a cascading, involuntary distress pattern that every revanid on the bridge instantly received. I could not stop the physiological tremor. Now, how is that device interfacing with the dead grid? Kratos asked. Her voice was brittle. Explain the connection protocol. Bride lowered the brass instrument. He looked genuinely confused. You can't just look at the stars and know where you are? He asked. The bridge was silent. It doesn't need Wi-Fi, Bride added. I accessed the Galactic Historical Database with hands that I could not keep still. The Earth Archive detailed a planetary environment characterized by severe electrical storms, extreme temperature fluctuations, and atmospheric violence. They survived multiple ice ages. I realized with a profound and terrifying certainty that the entire Revanid navigation doctrine depends entirely on technology that an enemy can simply turn off, while this human relied on a method perfected on a world that routinely destroyed their technology for sport. The Revanid doctrine, revised across 40 editions over 3 centuries, had just been rendered supplementary by a man holding what his species would call a very expensive protractor. Lieutenant Gossar opened his personal terminal. I saw him type, I am reconsidering my career. He paused. He added, and my species' entire navigational philosophy. The fleet was safe. The brass instrument is gone from the desk. Lieutenant Gossar mounted it inside the emergency locker behind protective glass. A single amber service lamp illuminates the plaque. Navigation, panicking, human Oregon. Bride just went back to sketching.